This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are joined by Elle Grover Fricks to discuss the first in a series of images we find in the desert. What does it mean to be a shepherd in the biblical world?
Elle, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Brent, we do have a presentation today that people can find pictures and photos that might be helpful as we talk about different things.
If you open up the presentation now and you look at it and you're like, what in the world? So it will make sense as we go. But yeah,
absolutely. And the reason why that's there, we've made it to the book of Numbers. And the book of Numbers for our study here in session 1 is going to be the time where I start talking about the desert. And we'll talk about that more in a moment, but we'll talk about the book of Numbers as being like this desert honeymoon period. And we've made it to that point in the story. And instead of just going through the text of Numbers, we're going to use this spot of Torah to do something particular for our session 1 journey. And so probably a good time. This is the period of time where God's people wander in the desert, but we should probably do some review and set that up. So we had a preface. We talked about a good creation. We talked about trusting in the goodness of that creation, and we're not trusting in the goodness of the creation. We're trusting in the goodness of the God behind the creation. And yet this good God that made creation told us that it was good and invited us to trust that it was good, to trust in his provision and his care for that creation. And so that's what we found in the preface. And then we got introduced to a family of God in the introduction, Genesis 12 through 50. We learned through this family what's possible when we do trust. Wherever there's trust in the story, we learned that there's reconciliation. There's not perfection. There's plenty of sin and rebellion and selfishness and deception and all kinds of ugliness. But when they keep leaning back towards this faithful God and what it means to trust in his faithfulness, you keep finding the story that has this power to be put back together. And that was the setup to a narrative about deliverance, a narrative of Exodus. Starting in the book of Exodus, we learned about God's rescue of his people in the Exodus story, the story of the Passover. He leads them out of Egypt, leads them through the Red Sea, leads them through the desert to Mount Sinai, where there's a wedding. So there's a rescue and there's a wedding, a gigantic wedding ceremony. And then the rest of the book of Exodus was all about the tabernacle, all these instructions about the tabernacle. And we talked about the tabernacle. We talked about it in like a clever narrative sense. We could say it's the honeymoon suite. It's what came right after the wedding. You could talk about it in that way. We talked about as a literary device, the tabernacle is like a retelling of Genesis 1, maybe Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Like the beginning of the story is like held there in the tabernacle. You've got the tree of life behind cherubim. You've got all kinds of things that are there, just bringing the story of Genesis, the story that we trust with us. But the tabernacle can also be framed in terms of mission. And right before we got the tabernacle, God told his people about a mission. He said, I need you to be a kingdom of priests. And that raises a question of what priests are. And so in the last episode, we looked at this idea of priesthood. What does it mean to be a priest? When God says, I need you to be a kingdom of priests, what did that entail? And so the tabernacle is in a lot of ways about priesthood. And so now they've learned about this relationship with God. They've learned about who they are, who God is, who they are, and how they relate to one another. They've gotten their marching orders, you could say. But now they have to learn experientially. They have to yada, and they have to be shaped and formed in this relationship. It's one thing to know about it. It's one thing to be able to identify the pieces and understand how it works. It's another thing to actually be shaped and formed and experience that relationship. And so that's what they're going to do. And they're going to do that in the desert. And I love this part of our study in session 1 because the desert was so meaningful to me. When I got to study with Ray years and years ago, we spent almost a week in the desert. It was this deeply shaping experience for me. And you can, if you want to try to find it, there is a volume of his video series that the world may know series, volume 12, is called Walking with God in the Desert. We'll link that in the show notes. And we may even throw a couple other links in there. Brent and I had a meeting today with Focus on the Family, and they were sharing all the resources that they have made over the last few years that weren't there the last time we did this. And so we may even have some other links if there are any in the show notes. Don't be surprised. But volume 12 of That the World May Know series, Walking with God in the Desert, portrays a lot of the lessons that I learned in person with with Ray. And this is a hard section for me to teach because it's very difficult to teach the desert from behind a podcast mic. It's very, very difficult to teach the desert and not be in the desert. Maybe I would just even, both of you have been there. Brent, you've been in the desert. Elle, other than, suffering with heat exhaustion and all that kind of stuff, it's hard to talk desert without being in the desert, yes?
Yeah. But, lots of people have visited before, and I think it's a common experience. People move to the desert. They love the desert. There's something inherently haunting and moving and beautiful about the desert. It's one of my favorite landscapes, places to go. I lived in Israel on the edge of the desert, not the actual desert, but yeah. If we're going to plan a road trip, I'm like, oh, great. Can we get to the desert? Because that's the goal for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just the literal desert, the biblical desert, but if I hear you right, you're saying just often people are drawn to deserts of all kinds because of its ability to shape us and what it does to the human experience.
Absolutely.
The concentration of national parks in the Utah desert is pretty astounding when you look at the map.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah. Southwest.
All right. Well, I have this quote I always start with. It's from Bruce Feiler. It's from a book called Walking the Bible. Bruce is one of my favorite authors from way back when I was learning, and he has many books I enjoy, one of them called Walking the Bible. And in that, he says this about the desert. He says, because the place is demanding, it builds character. Because it's destructive, it builds interdependence. Because it's isolating, it builds community. Because it's the desert, it builds nations. I'll read that quote one more time. Because the place is demanding, it builds character. Because it is destructive, it builds interdependence. Because it's isolating, it builds community. Because it is the desert, it builds nations. And I've always just loved that and its ability to articulate what the desert has the ability to do. And so I want to talk about an image today. I want to talk about shepherds. We're going to spend the next handful of episodes talking about different images of the desert, different things that you would learn. If you were to come with me over to Israel and we were to spend a few days in the desert, there are a few things that I would find in the desert and try to teach lessons about, because these images, these pictures are unbelievably powerful in their ability to teach us things about who we are, about who God is, about what God's trying to do in the world. And the first thing I want to talk about today is this concept of shepherds. It's one of the images of the desert. It might strike us as odd. Shepherds, desert. What do shepherds have to do with deserts? And one of the resources, by the way, that we'll use and often recommend is a resource by Kenneth Bailey, great scholar that we'll quote often. He had a book called The Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd by Kenneth Bailey. And a lot of great stuff in there about shepherds. Not that I will necessarily agree with every single detail in there, but just a great resource, just chock full of stuff. And here's where I want to start. I want to start by doing a little learning about Hebrew. We've learned some Hebrew words here and there along our journey. But I want to there's a concept that I was taught, the concept of word trees. I don't even know how formal of an expression that is. But we have Elle Grover Fricks with us. And I was like, Elle, can you teach us about word trees? Give us, the word for desert is the word midbar.
Mm-hmm.
And midbar comes from another root. And Hebrew doesn't have vowels. It only has consonants, all the things. Can you give us the most cursory tour of how a Hebrew word works and how these words can be related around a single image?
So in Hebrew, every word is built using 3 consonants. 3 consonants at the root. So if you're imagining this tree, you dig down, you look at the actual roots, there'd just be 3 letters there. And then in Hebrew, you add vowels, you add an extra sound, you add an extra letter, you throw it in the middle, you throw it at the end, the beginning, whatever. And whenever you do that, those come out like different branches from this tree, and they have different meanings, but always related meaning to whatever the base image, the most basic meaning of the word. Often, if you scroll all the way back through the concordance, the oldest version of the word. And so for midvar, the root is this DVR or DBR, depending on who's anglicizing something. And the ver means, or davar, again, a whole lot of vowel options. The image is speak, and the word means to speak. So when you add the M sound at the beginning, it becomes place of speaking. So in Hebrew, anytime they're talking about the desert, or often it's translated wilderness, right? What they are literally saying is place of speaking. Jesus ran off to the place of speaking. David went off to the place of speaking. So that is the etymological, the Hebraic background to every scene that's in the desert.
Can you give us some options of things that you could do with DVR to make different words? Like give us some different vowelations and how those words might be related.
For sure. Sometimes if you throw an E sound in there, then that can be translated commandment. You stick a couple other letters on the front. It means to come into agreement or discuss. There's one that means plague, depending on how you vowelate it. So that's interesting. Hopefully it's a place of speaking for you, not a place of plague, if you do go. But speaker, word, sometimes it's even translated thing. The title of the book of Deuteronomy is the scroll of Devarim. So it's the book of words. It's the book of things, you could even translate it. But it's things that Moses was saying, but now we're ahead of ourselves.
Okay. So dabar being word, dabar, or different versions of it to speak.
Yes.
So there's the actual noun version of word itself, and then there's the verb of to word, to speak.
Yes, precisely. You told me not to get too technical, so I'm trying not to here. But when it shows up as amar, as a different root, that's a casual, I'm just talking to. Elle talked to Brent.
Yes.
But if Marty Solomon is giving me a word, he's giving me something to put in my pocket that I should keep with me for the next 5 years, that is a davar. That's a word he has spoken. So it has a little bit more weight to it than amar. So place of speaking is the desert, place of this weighty thing that gets communicated to you, not just like, oh, I want to go chat with somebody. Let's go to the desert.
Okay, so this desert or wilderness, midbar being the place of word, this place that Jesus goes, this place that David goes, because it's a place where we hear the word. I love that concept. And this is important to me because it drives home the idea that Hebrew is built off of images and pictures, not precise definitions. So I was once told that biblical Hebrew has 8,000 words in it. I think that's referring to root words. And then our modern English has, I've heard anywhere from 400,000 to 800,000, hundreds of thousands. The comparison there being you're packing a lot more into a Hebrew word because of its picture and its ability to speak, not because of its precise definition, its precision, but because of its illustration. Elle, would you say that that's the value of Hebrew language?
Yes, a lot more abstract concepts in English, like love, and more picture-based, and therefore more concrete things that can transfer across different contexts.
Absolutely. One of the images that I was taught about this concept is the idea of this concept and shepherds, because shepherds were another one of those things that you found in the desert. I can remember being with RVL on, was it my very first trip? I think it was. And we were driving out through the wilderness, the Judean wilderness. And the bus pulls over on the side of the road. And we all bail out. I think actually we did this on, I can't remember if it was your trip or not. Elle, did we bail out of the bus and go find a flock on your trip or not?
No.
No. Okay. Well, on my very first trip, we did. And we had a similar experience. And it was a ton of fun. We bailed out of the bus. We kind of ran across the highway. We jumped up on this hill. And here came this flock. And I've got these videos, these old videos that I got to figure out how to get in a digital form, Brent, before I'm no longer able to. But I got these old videos taken with this old camcorder of this flock as they passed by us. And I got to learn that day. We sat there watching for like 40 minutes or an hour. This shepherd and her flock just kind of like going across a hillside, kind of off in the distance for about an hour. And so many of these things came to life for me. So many of these pictures and words like to lead, words like voice, Words like desert took on a whole new meaning for me. Desert is the place of the shepherd. A shepherd is always leading his sheep in the desert pasture. Brent, when I say pasture, what do you think of?
Well, before I was in Bama, I was thinking, just like a grassy field. Maybe some trees around the edges, maybe a little creek over on the side, but
sure,
just this kind of a lush whatever.
Yeah, and I get emails from people that shepherd sheep here in America as they listen to session 1, and it's just different over there. They don't shepherd their sheep in fields. They don't graze in fields. In fact, in the Christmas story, we're told that the shepherds are in the fields grazing their sheep, and that actually tells us what time of year it is, because your fields are fields, and your sheep have to go somewhere else because they're not going to be on top of your fields where you're farming all your fields and your agriculture. So they have to go somewhere else. So they start in that, and then they work their way out to the desert after the harvest, and they spend their times out in the desert. I can remember learning as I sat on that hillside about the shepherds and how they would call the paths that the sheep make after about 3,000-4,000 years of shepherding your sheep on the same hillside year after year after year for thousands of years. Like there are these ruts that go along the side of the hillside. I remember my teacher telling us that the shepherds, the Bedouin shepherds, would call them paths of righteousness. This picture and this image that if you follow those paths, you will eventually find the shepherd. The shepherd is on the paths of righteousness. I remember learning the shepherd never leads with their staff. Like the shepherd might have a staff, might be for walking, like a walking stick. It might be for defense, but the shepherd never leads the sheep, never beats the sheep. Like there's all kinds of fun, like sermon illustrations I've been told about the shepherd hitting the sheep to teach them how to go the right way, or this violent image of the shepherd like breaking the leg of a lamb that's rebellious so that the lamb has to stay on his shoulders and learn how to stay with the flock. And these are just not biblical images. It's not the images of the biblical shepherd in the desert. The shepherd leads with their voice. In this video that I have, there's this shot where you can't see anything. We're just watching the hillside, and there's kind of a hill in the way. And then all of a sudden on the distant hill, you see the flock start to come into view. And the flock, it's kind of like this blob. You can see this blob of like sheep, and it's just kind of moving across the hillside. And then about 100 yards behind the flock comes the shepherd. And she's just talking to the sheep. She's just giving commands. She's just sing-song, kind of telling them where to go and what to do. And they're just following her voice. But she's behind the flock telling them where to go. Sheep respond to their voice commands. I've been told that multiple shepherds can bring multiple flocks into the same sheepfold at night. You could have 3 shepherds, 3 different flocks of sheep in the same space, all mixed together. And a shepherd will get up in the morning, walk out, give one single voice command, and only his flock will come with him. I think of Jesus saying, "My sheep know my voice." Shepherds lead with their voice. The desert is the place of the shepherd, and the desert, the midbar, is the place of dabar, words. Did you ever have any experiences with shepherds when you were over in Israel doing your studies or anything else?
I met some Bedouin communities for sure. But no, I was at university and stressing too much to wander the hills. Glorious experiences like yours.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Brent, would you pull up Psalm 23? It's the psalm that we're familiar with. We've heard of Psalm 23. I just want to walk through Psalm 23 in these images and just let this teach us here for a moment.
The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures.
All right, let's talk about green pastures here, all right? These are not lush fields of waist-deep alfalfa, but they're these little tufts of dry grass in the desert rocks. Were you impressed with the green pastures of the desert, Brent?
I never could have possibly imagined what it looked like without seeing the picture and subsequently seeing it in person.
How about the greenness? How about the green aspect of these green pastures?
Oh, just this rich Kelly green. Like, think Ireland.
Yeah, Brent is saying that with sarcasm. It is brown, dry, what looks like dead grass that these sheep are eating.
It's more like, what grass, Marty? Are you crazy?
Yeah, but you can't, unless you train your eyes, you almost can't see it. When the sun hits it just right at twilight, I have a photo of it with a really bad quality camera. But if the sun hits it just right, it does have a green hue to it. And I was taught that's what the Bedouins call green pastures. That if the sun hits it just right, you can see the grass. There's this one moment where the sun will hit it. It's almost got this green. You can see the grass there on the hillside. Otherwise, it's even hard to see. I remember, Brent, when we recorded this the first time, you had an illustration about the size of serving that you were going to experience here with these tufts of grass. You remember that?
I said in the original episode, you might be thinking a shareable size bag of M&Ms. I have with me, even better, Marty, I have a family-sized bag of M&Ms.
Ah, yes, okay.
But it's all wrong.
Yes.
It's just one M&M, and it's a brown one. So it's old.
Yeah.
And you can't even see it. It gets lost in the desert.
Yes. It is not. These sheep have their head down because there's going to be one tuft of grass, just one mouthful in front of them. And the desert is where I learned that day on the hillside. The lesson of the desert teaches you just enough. It's the lesson of the shepherd. Just enough. I have enough for one bite right now. It's the only bite I need right now. I just need the one bite right now. And I'm going to trust that my shepherd will lead me to my next bite. So I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to follow the voice and the command. Elle said the word command is in that word tree. I'm going to follow the voice and the command of the shepherd. And I'm just going to wait for that next bite. And so there was that line, Brent, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Or some translations would say, I lack nothing. I have what I need. I don't have any more than I need. I don't have abundance. And that changes Psalm 23 to me. Because I think we hear Psalm 23 with a very American, like Psalm 23. Oh, he leads me green pastures. It's about comfort. All my needs are met because I have an abundance. No. All my needs are met because I have just enough. Like I have exactly what I need and nothing more. That's part of what Psalm 23 is speaking about in the images of the desert. To wait on every word that comes from God is another passage in Deuteronomy. Man doesn't live by bread alone, but on every word, every debar that comes from the mouth of God. Where did they learn that? Deuteronomy says you learned that in the wilderness. You learned that as you walked through the desert. You learned how to wait on the word of the God. You didn't learn how to be comfortable because you had got all your shopping done. You learned how to wait on God's provision, the manna, the daily. Give me the next line, Brent.
He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul.
All right, Elle, think back to your time in the desert. All the bubbling brooks that you saw out there, yes?
So many.
Wonderful, cascading water. No, it's the still water. He leads me by still water, not running water. He leads me by these muddy little pools at the bottom of a desert wadi. Really glorious, really yummy. But it's just enough. It's what the flock might need. It's what the sheep will need to quench their thirst. It's not American abundance. It's the lesson of the desert. Give me the next line, Brent.
He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake.
All right, those paths of righteousness, the old translation used to say. There's that reference to what I was told the Bedouin called those shepherd paths. Give me the next part.
Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, Ray taught me that in the night and at nightfall, it's dangerous for shepherds to not have their flocks back to their camp. And so if they're ever out past nightfall, instead of walking behind or in front of the flock, the shepherd will get right in the middle of the flock and give a command, and the sheep will just crowd in right around the shepherd, and they'll follow the shepherd because they've got to stay really close because the shepherd knows where to walk and where to step and where to go. There was a story back in 2006 of a shepherd that got separated after nightfall from his flock and wasn't paying attention and was on the other side of the turn of a chasm and gave a command to his sheep, and almost his whole flock walked right off the edge of the chasm because the sheep follow the shepherd's voice. Like they do what the shepherd commands. They're following the shepherd wherever he goes. Give me the next line.
I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
All right, there's that stick, not that beats obviously if a stick is going to be used to like hold it violently over your head, it's not going to comfort you. But this rod and staff comforts because it's not about discipline. This rod and staff of the shepherd is about leadership, about protection, about those kind of things. Go ahead.
You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
I just find this teaching and have found this teaching to be super comforting and helpful, because there's seasons in life where you're like, geez Louise, where's the bubbling brook? Where's my green pasture? What am I doing wrong that I'm not there? And in the story, including in the book of Numbers, the desert isn't where they live forever. It's not a season that is supposed to be the ultimate destiny of God's people, right? They're on their way. They're going somewhere else, but they have to learn lessons in the desert first. And so it's not that God only will give me, this scrap of bread for the rest of my days. But if you do find yourself with a scrap of bread, you can know that God is in the middle of it with us, and that there are things to be learned and ways that we might be able to hear God that we are not able to hear potentially when we're in the lush, verdant, Kelly green pasture of our imagination.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just found the context of the desert to be so helpful. And I've already talked about earlier in session 1, my story of Hadijah, my story of being, offered in this desert region, just unbelievable hospitality and what she did for a group of visitors. And then how I've experienced that multiple times since. So when I read Psalm 23, talk about, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. For me, that's a desert image. It's about shepherds like that. The people that offered me that were often, most all those stories are almost all shepherd families. And I just love Psalm 23 and the way it's been reframed. Just like Elle's saying, it's been very helpful. And so this is one of the images of the desert. God will use the desert to teach us how to become people of the ears and not people of the eyes. Think about that word tree. It's about word. It's about voice. It's about command. It's about being the place of the word. It's not about being the place of things you can see. The desert is actually a really disorienting place when you're down in the middle of the wadis. You can't see where you're going. You don't know where the next hill is. Like the desert is not this wide open, vast horizon of sand dunes that some of us picture. It's this a place where you could get lost. It is not a place of the eyes. The desert is a place of the ears. It is the midbar. It's a place of word, and it's a place of voice. And obviously, we're talking about deserts. We're talking about literal deserts. But hopefully, we're quick enough to understand we're also talking about our own deserts, our quote-unquote deserts. Not necessarily literal deserts, but our spiritual deserts, our personal deserts. Kind of what Elle was hinting at there a moment ago, like we've experienced these seasons of life that we're deeply shaping. And I just find that to be so helpful. Brent, were there any other thoughts that you had? I remember last time we recorded this, you had some really helpful prompts of other things that you had remembered from your time with shepherds in the desert.
Well, I think about the idea of the sheep and the goats and how they actually eat different things.
Right.
Like they're not in the same place exactly. The goats are spread out. They have different behaviors, but they also like work in tandem, and they need slightly different things.
Yeah, I was always told that a typical Bedouin flock in that region will often have sheep and goats because they're eating different resources. So you can have two different animals together in the same area, and they're not competing for the same feed. Like the sheep are eating the grass that we talked about, those green pastures, and the goats are eating like everything else is what I've been told. Every bush, every shrub, every weed, everything that's not grass, the goats are eating. And then everything that's grass, the sheep are eating. And so you can have them together and you get two different things. From the sheep, you get wool. From the goats, you get your dairy, your cheese, your milk, all that kind of stuff. And so you can have different resources and maximize your flock by having sheep and goats. And of course, you say that, and we should be thinking about all these biblical stories that reference sheep and goats. I think of Jesus's parable, the sheep and the goats. And you mentioned they're in different spots. I go back to that video I was talking about earlier on my camcorder, where you have the little flock blob, and they're all blobbed together because they're sheep and they're doing what the shepherd says. So it's this little blob, this little circle of sheep. And then the shepherd comes into view. And then right as the shepherd comes into view, right behind the shepherd is just this hillside speckled with goats. Not a blob. They're like everywhere. They're all over the mountainside. They're doing whatever they want. Like sheep follow the voice. Sheep do what the shepherd says. Sheep follow the commands. Goats, they do their own thing. Goats kind of do whatever they want. They'll eventually get to the same place. And so Ray always challenged us, which one are you? I mean, that's the parable, sheep and goats. Which one are you? Are you the one that does, you know the shepherd's voice, you do what the shepherd says, you follow the shepherd's command? Or are you the goat that kind of knows you know a better way? You're kind of rebellious, because they're both a part of the flock. The goats and the sheep are both a part of the flock. They're both following the shepherd. They're both going to kind of get to the same place eventually by the end of the night. All are in the same flock, and yet God's looking for sheep, not goats. Seems to be one of the clear things that we pull out of those teachings. And so that challenge of the sheep and the goats.
Goats are actually even worse than you think, Marty, because it turns out not only do they just do their own thing, but they're actually really picky.
Sure.
So I had a little bit of a backyard situation at one point, and we found out that our neighbor across the street had some goats. And I was like, could they come eat some stuff in our backyard? Because it's mostly weeds. And I was like, this is going to be perfect. They're just going to come in. They're just going to clear cut the thing all the way to the ground. So they come in, and I've got a time lapse thing set up, and everything is continuing to grow. I'm like, what are they doing? They're running all over the place. Are they not eating anything? Well, they are eating things, but they're just picky.
Yeah, absolutely.
The word for goat means strength. So bringing it back to that parable, it's one of the words for strength. Are you trying to be the strong person? Is that who God's really looking for? Or is he looking for those who are able to listen?
And that's going to be really good. That's going to come up more than a couple times in our images of the desert. And I've never made that connection in the shepherd lesson, but I love that you brought that in here. That's going to be a common lesson of the desert, is what is our strength actually able to do for us? And what is God inviting us to learn about our strength, our own strength in the desert? So I do love that.
The other thing I wanted to ask about was, who are the shepherds? Because it was not who I would typically picture.
Yeah, I was surprised too to learn that day. The flock that we saw was being led by these two, I would assume, teenage female shepherds. They were leading this flock, and they had their two younger brothers with them that day. And I just never pictured and Ray said this is very typical in their culture. These flocks will be driven by the older teenage girls of the family. You have these older patriarchs that are running the family business, often sitting around doing, typically nothing, talking about all the family business. The women are around doing the family work. They send their older daughters out to watch the flocks, their older boys out to help kind of run the family business or whatever it is that they do for a living. Then the younger boys get sent out with those older sisters to kind of be babysat while they're out and about for the day. And I remember as the flock went by, I was able to, I think we have the photo, I was able to snap the group, the two boys and the two gals that were watching the flock together. And it was just this wonderful picture of how I could see so many biblical stories. I thought of David. One of the boys is actually in that photo is holding a sling. I was told that they throw rocks all day, hundreds, thousands of rocks a day. Whether they have an actual sling or not, they're used to throwing rocks. They'll give voice commands to the sheep. They'll throw rocks behind them. They'll throw rocks to the side of them to try to steer the flock or get them to move faster, but just something that they end up doing. And so I had this literal photograph that helped me reorder my mental picture of who shepherds can be and how that operates. When David leaves his flock, he probably doesn't leave the flock with nobody. He's probably a young boy, and his sisters are out watching the flocks, and he leaves. He gets sent on this errand to go run some supplies to his older brothers, but his sisters are probably the ones watching the flock. We have stories of Jacob showing up at a well where there's female shepherds watching their flocks, waiting for the male shepherds to come by to remove the stone. You've got Moses showing up at a well with female shepherds. This is actually the dominant picture and image. Not that there aren't male shepherds in the text. There certainly are. The Christmas story, I've wondered at times, they could easily be men. The shepherds of Bethlehem kind of running the sheep supply for the temple project. They could easily be male shepherds, but it wouldn't be odd at all in that culture for them to be female and women shepherds. Those are just some of the things that changed for me. Those weren't the pictures that I often had when I thought about shepherds, but absolutely. Either you have any other thoughts about shepherds or things that you had learned or seen in your time there?
When I lived there, everything is definitely a family enterprise. And you see at a restaurant, every member of the family is helping out, scrubbing the floor, doing different things. And so it certainly makes sense that this occupation, like so many others, would be run by every member of the family, no matter the age and the gender and everything. So all makes sense to me.
I don't know. I've only ever seen a flock of camels, so I have nothing to add. Just one more Israel trip, Marty. That's all I need.
Yeah.
Just one more.
Just one more Israel trip. My first trip got a really good one. That one in 2014 was a heck of a flock that day. We got blessed by quite the ability to see something cool. But just that whole idea of, it's such a dominant idea in your scriptures that God led us through the desert, that God was a shepherd leading us like a flock through the desert. That part of what that means when the biblical people hear that is following the voice of our shepherd, and the desert being the place of voice. And just that image became a very shaping image for me in my study in the desert.
And in early Christian tradition, before the crucifix and the cross became one of the defining pictures in Christianity, one of the earliest images for Christianity that we find in the catacombs and art, jewelry all over the place is of a young shepherd boy with a sheep slung across his back. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Great point.
All right. Well, we've got a few links in the show notes. Definitely check out the pictures whenever you have a chance. The paths of righteousness, the whole thing. Like, it's just not what we grew up thinking, not what we were. I don't know if we were misled necessarily. We just don't have this context. So check out those pictures, get an idea of what that looks like, and spend some time in this passage and try to reframe your understanding of what is going on here. Think about that time in the desert as you read through Numbers and what that would be like for those people. And you can do all of that in the discussion group that you have surely already started. And if you haven't, please go to BehemothDiscipleship.com. Check out the map. There might already be one in your area, but if not, you can use the contact page to get in touch with us to start your own group. You can also use the website to find a way to support us if you want to. Everything we do is made possible by our listeners. But thanks for joining us on the Behemoth Podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hi, I'm Andrew, a Bema listener and group facilitator in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And here's the prayer from episode 26's Companion. God, our good shepherd, you guide us through the desert with your voice, singing over the heat in the face of the sun. Leaning on your staff, you guide us, protect us. Sometimes we question and doubt, yet you bring us back into your fold and never stop calling our name. You lead us to just enough water, enough food, enough shade, just in time. May we know your voice, following you so closely on those paths of righteousness that yours is the only song that urges us to move, to act. In the desert, we may learn even more to trust the story and wait on every word from you, our shepherd. Amen.